Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. It is Monday, September 12th at 10 a.m. We are here this morning in docket 22-3-E, which is an annual review of base rates for fuel costs for Duke Energy Carolinas, LLC. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Appearing with us virtually is Commissioner Irvin, and present in the hearing room is Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Caston, Commissioner Carol Lee Williams, and Commissioner Belser. Recognize our staff counsel, Mr. Stark, to read the docket.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair of the Commissioners, we're here in docket number 2022-3-E, which concerns the annual review of base rates for fuel costs of Duke Energy Carolinas, LLC. This hearing has been scheduled for September the 12th, 2022 in the offices of the Commission and virtually, set to begin at 10 a.m. Madam Chair, I believe the docket to be in order.
Thank you, Mr. Stark. At this point, let's take appearances from the parties, and at this point, we're only taking appearances. Thank you. Who's representing Duke Energy Carolinas?
Good morning, Chair Belzer, Vice Chair Powers, members of the Commission. I'm Katie Brown. I'm in-house counsel for Duke Energy Carolinas, LLC. Here with me this morning is Lyle Trawick. He's with the law firm Robinson Gray. We appreciate the opportunity to be here in person this morning and look forward to presenting our case.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. And who's representing the South Carolina Energy Users Committee?
Madam Chair, I'm Scott Elliott. I'm here representing the energy users.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and Upstate Forever.
Good morning, Chair Belzer. My name is Kate Mixon, here representing SACE, CCL, and Upstate Forever. And also with me today is my co-counsel, Emma Clancy.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. And the Office of Regulatory Staff. You're on.
Okay. Good morning, Chair Belzer, members of the Commission. I'm Donna Rainey, and here with me today is Ben Mushton, and we're appearing on behalf of.
Thank you, Ms. Rainey. Council, you are invited to use microphones at either podium, or if you want to remain at your table, you may do so. I just know sometimes it's more comfortable to stand when you address, so please just feel free to be comfortable wherever you are during the proceeding. Any preliminary matters we need to discuss? Who's first?
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Duke Energy Carolinas does have one preliminary matter to address this morning. Duke Energy Carolinas and the South Carolina Energy Users Committee have entered into a stipulation regarding some of the issues in dispute in this case. The stipulation was filed with the Commission this morning. The stipulating parties recognize the significant and unusual nature of the proposed fuel rate increase, coupled with the current economic conditions faced by many customers. Under the terms of the stipulation, the company will establish a regulatory asset to defer and recover the actual undercollected balance of the base fuel component of its fuel costs as of May 31st, 2022. Specifically, the company will defer and recover approximately $145 million over a period of 24 months beginning on October 1st, 2022 and ending September 30th, 2024. The stipulating parties agree and stipulate that the company will charge and accrue interest monthly on the amount DEC would have billed but for the deferral, so interest on approximately $72.5 million of the balance. The applicable interest rate used to calculate the carrying costs is the rate of interest as of the first day of each month for the applicable period for the 3-year U.S. government Treasury note plus 65 basis points. SCEUC and the company agree that the total interest rate used to calculate the carrying costs, including the 65 basis points, shall not exceed 6%. Under the stipulation, the average monthly residential bill will increase approximately $12.44 or 10.4% beginning in October. This is less than the $15.76 or 13.2% increase for residential customers sought in the company's pre-filed direct testimony. The original increase requested for general service customers was 18.3%, and under the stipulation, it would be 14.5%. For industrial customers, the original proposed rates would represent approximately a 24.4% increase, and under the terms of the stipulation, the increase will be approximately 19.3%. For lighting customers, the proposed increase under the company's pre-file direct testimony was 7.2%, and under the terms of the stipulation, the increase will be 5.7%. The fuel factor for residential customers will increase from 1.9607 cents per kilowatt hour to 3.1918 cents per kilowatt hour. This is less than the 3.5222 cents per kilowatt hour total fuel factor for residential customers sought in the company's pre-filed direct testimony. Madam Chair, I would request that the stipulation be marked and entered into the record as the first hearing exhibit.
Any objection to receiving the stipulation into evidence? Hearing none, the stipulation will be marked as hearing exhibit number 1 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Chair Belzer.
Is that all, Ms. Brown? From
That's
you?
all.
Are the other parties, are you at a position to address the stipulation now, or do you need more time? Because I know that this has just come in.
So for SACE CCL in Upstate Forever, we've just been able to circulate the stipulation agreement to our clients this morning, and so we're not in a position to take a position on it right now.
Okay. ORS?
ORS is in a position to make some comments. I don't know if Mr. Elliott had any comments first, but I'm certainly willing to
I'm
address
sure he does.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Mustian, Ms. Brown has faithfully summarized the terms of the stipulation. We think that it is in the public interest in that while the rate increases remain historically high, I suppose, it blunts the impact of these rising fuel costs that are frankly beyond, in most instances, the control of the utilities. I would like to point out that that the stipulation is modeled on that approved by this commission in order number 2014-787. This deferral concept has been accepted on any of a number of occasions by this commission. The order number 2014-787 is a Duke fuel case. Then SCE&G was frequently agreeable or amenable to deferring rate increases back when they were building the nuclear reactors, and so there's an extensive precedental history for these deferrals on the E&G or Dominion side. But we believe this is in the public interest. We think that the commission's options are somewhat limited, and so we would urge the commission to approve the stipulation.
Mr. Elliott, when you say that there are a number of these deferrals in fuel cases?
Yes, ma'am. I just cite to the Duke fuel case since we're here in the Duke 2022 case.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna ask SACE and CCL, perhaps after a break, you can notify us, or maybe even at the end, but when you're ready to address, if you could just let us know, we'll find time. Is that okay? Does that meet with your approval?
Yes, Chair Belzer.
Thank you. Mr. Mustian?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. So first at the outset, let me say that ORS appreciates all of the hard work that the company and the energy users have put into reaching this stipulation. We understand the gravity of the issues in this proceeding and the impact on customers, and know the work that they have done has been significant. So we do appreciate that. We've reviewed the terms of the stipulation, and although we are not a signatory to the agreement, we do not object to the commission approving it. Let me start by saying we've had a chance to review it. There was an issue that came up this morning that I have been told by Duke and EUC, question as to whether or not the carrying costs applied to the full $145 million or just to the 72.5 approximately that's being deferred to the second year. We understand that it would only apply to that 72.5 million. And so we would just like the record to be clear on that, which I believe Ms. Brown explained when she was presenting the stipulation to the commission. That said, we recognize that deferring a portion of the costs will provide DEC ratepayers with some measure of relief in the short term and will allow the industrial customers to incorporate those costs into their operational budgets. We also recognize that customers are struggling at this time with higher inflation costs, groceries, gasoline, goods and services. All of those are seeing higher prices, and customers are having to bear the impact of that as well. But we also must recognize that deferring a portion of the cost to next year ultimately will result in increased costs to ratepayers over the long term. Specifically, since the settlement allows DEC to recover carrying costs, we understand it would add approximately $6.1 million on top of the company's actual undercollected balance, and those costs ultimately would be borne by customers. Also, as we discussed in the testimony of witnesses in this proceeding, fuel prices are volatile right now. So it is entirely possible that fuel prices could continue to go up, resulting in another significant undercollection next year. If that were to happen, then it would have a pancaking effect and would result in even higher fuel factors next year. So when we looked at the settlement, we considered all of those issues in the context of our statutory mandate to represent the public interest, which includes the concerns of the using and consuming public and preservation of continued investment in and maintenance of utility facilities, so as to provide reliable and high-quality utility services. In that light, while we are not signing on to the settlement agreement, we also understand that the Commission must consider the settlement agreement and whether it serves the public interest in the broader context. We understand that the Commission must weigh the opportunity and benefit of minimizing the immediate impact of the fuel increases along with the associated costs. So for those reasons, we do not object to the approval of the stipulation and would not appeal the Commission's decision if you decide to approve it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mustian.
Madam Chair.
Vice Chair Powers.
Madam Chair, particularly I guess for the audience that may be watching this procedure, would it be less confusing to call this a partial stipulation at this time? I mean, just in that presentation, I've heard settlement agreement, I've heard stipulation, and it was very confusing in a recent hearing as to what was stipulated and what wasn't. And it may just be a matter of semantics, but would it be okay or would it be proper to call it a partial stipulation until all parties agree?
Your point is well taken. It is termed a stipulation. Unfortunately, I know that I'm guilty of trying to use settlement agreement and stipulation interchangeably, and it's not always the case. So I'm probably guilty of misnaming it as much as anyone. It is a stipulation between Duke Energy Carolinas and the South Carolina Energy Users Committee. And as to those parties, it is a stipulation, but none of the other parties are signatories. So I have no problem with calling it a partial stipulation in that it is partial in that all parties are not signatories.
Thank you, ma'am. I just thought that should be brought out in some form. Thank
I
you.
appreciate the clarification you've provided. Thank you, sir. Anything else? We may come back with additional questions because we just received the partial stipulation this morning as well. So can you identify if there's any one or two particular witnesses that would be appropriate to address this? Ms. Brown, Mr. Elliott, either one?
Chair Belzer, I believe our rates witness, Sigourney Clark, would be able to speak to the rate impacts here and to the terms of the settlement agreement.
Thank you. Anything further? Any other preliminary matters? I believe we have some requests for witness accommodation if needed. I will just need for the parties to help keep us on track as to where we are in the day so that we can make sure that we can accommodate, I believe, Mr. Benz and potentially Mr. O'Donnell. Is there any objection from any parties for taking witnesses out of order if need be?
No objection from the company.
Okay, hearing none. With that, if there are no more preliminary matters, Duke Energy Carolinas, y'all want to call your first witnesses.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. It seems we've forgotten to put up the placards, so we're going to grab those really quickly. Madam Chair, the company would first call Mr. Stephen Capps and Mr. Brian Walsh as a panel.
Just do it in the list. I got it.
I apologize that we forgot to put up the name placards.
We're fine.
Commissioners.
We're fine. Ms. Brown, are you comfortable there? Because you're kind of behind your witnesses.
Would you prefer that I move?
As long as you're comfortable and the witnesses are comfortable, I'm fine. I'm just noting. Okay,
If they're good with it, I'm good with it.
okay.
All right, we'll get started. Mr. Capps, would you please state your name for the record?
Excuse me. Let's swear the witnesses, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, if you would raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Capps, would you please state your name for the record?
Stephen Capps.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Duke Energy Corporation, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Nuclear Operations.
How long have you worked in the nuclear industry?
A little over 35 years.
What is your educational background?
I have a degree in mechanical engineering, and I've also completed the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations Senior Nuclear Plant Management course.
Please describe any prior roles you've held that are relevant to this proceeding.
I've worked in DEC as a senior reactor operator, a shift technical advisor, an engineering manager, plant manager, site vice president, and then I've also been the senior vice president of our corporate organization. And in the corporate role, I had the corporate governance, oversight, and engineering functions.
Thank you, Mr. Capps. Can you please describe your current responsibilities at the company?
I am currently the Senior Vice President of Nuclear Operations for the South Carolina plants. So I have direct responsibility for our 3 plants in South Carolina. And then, as one might expect, I'm also still very involved in the operation of our plants in North Carolina as well.
Chair Belzer, based upon Mr. Capps' extensive experience in matters related to nuclear plant operations, I propose to tender this witness as an expert in the field of nuclear plant operations.
Mr. Capps, any voir dire for the witness on his expertise? Mr. Capps will be deemed an expert in the field of nuclear plant operations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Capps, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 13 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony this morning, would your answers be the same?
Yes, ma'am, they would.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Capps' pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Capps' pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Capps, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 2 publicly filed exhibits that were attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Do you have any changes to those exhibits at this time?
No, ma'am, I do not.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Capps' 2 publicly filed exhibits be entered as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Capps' pre-filed direct exhibits 1 and 2 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 2 and entered into the record of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Capps, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared one confidentially filed exhibit that was attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Do you have any changes to that exhibit at this time?
No, ma'am, I do not.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Capps' confidentially filed exhibit be entered as the next hearing exhibit and that it remain under seal.
Mr. Capps, Direct Exhibit 3 will be afforded confidential designation, will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 3 and entered into the record of this case.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Capps, would you please provide a summary of your testimony at this time?
Yes, ma'am. The purpose of my testimony is to describe and discuss the performance of DEC's nuclear fleet for the period of June 1st, 2021 through May 31st, 2022. DEC's primary objective is to safely provide reliable and cost-effective electricity to its customers. Safe and efficient operation of our nuclear facilities supports fulfillment of this objective. DEC operated its nuclear stations in a reasonable and prudent manner during their review period and achieved an actual net capacity factor of 94.06% while providing approximately 61% of the total power generated by DEC. For 22 consecutive years, DEC's nuclear units have exceeded a 90% capacity factor. There were 5 refueling outages completed during the review period. Fall 2021 outages at McGuire Unit 2, Catawba Unit 1, and Oconee Unit 2, followed by spring 2022 outages at McGuire Unit 1 and Oconee Unit 3. The fall 2021 Catawba Unit 1 refueling outage was completed in 18.8 days, establishing a new record refueling outage duration for Duke Energy's nuclear fleet and a U.S. industry record for refueling duration for ice condenser containment pressurized water reactors. 4 of the 5 refueling outages were completed within the schedule allocation. The spring 2022 refueling outage at McGuire Unit 1 extended 8 days beyond the schedule allocation due to an emergent challenge with the main generator seals. The spring 2022 Oconee Unit 3 refueling outage start was delayed by 1 week due to high system loads and grid challenges. Equipment challenges resulted in forced outages during the review period on Catawba Unit 1, Oconee Unit 2, McGuire Unit 2, and Catawba Unit 2. Plant personnel responded to these challenges appropriately and safely returned the units to service. As I stated previously, the company achieved an actual net nuclear capacity factor of 94.06% while executing 5 refueling outages during the review period. DEC's performance results support its continued commitment to achieving high performance without compromising safety and reliability. This concludes my testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Capps. Mr. Walsh, would you please state your name for the record?
Brian Walsh.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I am the Vice President of Central Operational and Services and Oversight for Duke Energy Business Services, LLC.
How long have you worked in the fossil hydro solar industry?
Approximately 23 years.
What is your educational background?
I hold a Bachelor of Mechanical Engineering degree and a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering. I'm also a registered professional engineer in the state of North Carolina.
Please describe any prior roles you have held that are relevant to your testimony in this proceeding.
I have held various roles of increasing responsibility in the generation, engineering, operations areas, and project management. This includes my roles as technical manager at Duke Energy Carolina's Marshall Steam Station, station manager at Duke Energy Indiana's Gallagher Station and Markland Hydro Station, Midwest Regional Manager with overall responsibility for the Midwest gas turbine fleet and some coal-fired facilities, General Manager for outages and projects in the Carolinas, and General Manager of Fossil Hydro Organizational Effectiveness.
Please describe your current responsibilities at the company.
I am responsible for providing engineering, environmental compliance planning, technical services, and maintenance services for Duke Energy's fleet of fossil, hydroelectric, and solar facilities.
How long have you been in your current role?
Since 2019.
Madam Chair, given Mr. Walsh's extensive experience in non-nuclear operations, plant operations, I propose to tender Mr. Walsh as an expert in the field of non-nuclear plant operations.
I have to write down what you're saying, so give me a minute. Any voir dire on Mr. Walsh's qualifications from any party? Hearing none, Mr. Walsh will be recognized as an expert in the field of non-nuclear plant operations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Walsh, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 11 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the Commission in this proceeding?
I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Walsh's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Walsh's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Walsh, would you please provide a summary of your testimony at this time?
Sure. The purpose of my testimony is to describe DEC's generation portfolio and changes made since the prior year's filing, discuss the performance of DEC's fossil, hydro, solar facilities during the period of June 1, 2021 through May 31, 2022, provide information on significant outages that occurred during the review period, and discuss DEC's environmental compliance efforts. DEC's fossil hydro solar generation portfolio consists of 14,277 megawatts of generating capacity, which includes 6,087 megawatts of coal-fired generation, 3,357 megawatts of hydroelectric generation, 2,633 megawatts of natural gas combustion turbine generation, 2,116 megawatts of natural gas combined cycle generation, 71 megawatts of solar dependable capacity, and 13 megawatts of combined heat and power generation. The company's generating units operated efficiently and reliably during the review period. During the review period, DEC's total system generation was 97,121,683 megawatt hours, of which approximately 39% was provided by the fossil, hydro, and solar fleet. The breakdown includes a 15% contribution from gas facilities, 21% from coal-fired stations, 1% contribution from hydro facilities, and 0.4% from solar facilities. DEC has installed pollution control equipment in order to meet various current reduction requirements for NOx, nitrogen oxides, and SO2, sulfur dioxide emissions. The type and quantity of emission-reducing chemicals varies depending on generation output, the chemical constituents in the fuel burned, and or the level of emissions reduction that is required. The goal is to effectively comply with emissions regulations and provide the optimal total cost operating solution. DEC will continue to leverage new technologies and chemicals to meet present and future emissions requirements. This concludes my direct testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Madam Chair, Mr. Walsh and Mr. Capps are now available to answer any questions from council or the commission.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Mr. Elliott? Ms. Mixon or Ms. Clancy?
No questions.
Mr. Mustian or anyone, Ms. Rainey?
No questions.
Commissioners? Commissioner Caston?
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Two mechanical engineers.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Impressive. Actually, Mr. Walsh, looking at your direct, I was really interested in the emissions control, and I think primarily for nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxide and mercury. What percentage, I guess, of these emissions does the equipment remove?
Yes, sir, I'd be happy to answer that question. So we have a variety of pollution control technologies that are out there to remove emissions. So I'll begin with the nitrogen oxides. And so we utilize two different types of technologies: selective catalytic reduction, SCR as it's known, and selective non-catalytic reduction, SNCR as it is known. The SCRs use a catalyst and then you inject ammonia. And we typically remove about 80% nitrogen oxide. And so you try to manage your boiler nitrogen oxide emission rate, and then you reduce down to your goal coming out the stack using the SCR. SCRs are typically employed for larger units and ones that run a lot, so you maximize NOx reduction. On the smaller units, selective non-catalytic reduction can be used where there is no catalyst and you inject urea or an ammonia-based product. In these cases, the removal rate is much lower. It's only 20%, but typically you're just trying to trim NOx removal and meet your overall emissions for that site. And because they're smaller units, the impact is a lot less. So we tend to put the SCRs on the larger units that run more and would emit more. On the sulfur dioxide reduction side, we utilize flue gas desulfurization, otherwise known as FGD. This is typically with a wet limestone process. You can also use lime to inject. And generally speaking, you can get over 95% SO2 reduction. So this has been a hallmark of our emissions control efforts beginning in the mid to late 2000s, before 2010, when a lot of these systems were installed across DEC. I would also note that the flue gas desulfurization has an added benefit because it will also remove mercury too. So we are in current compliance with the mercury and air toxin standard that was released, I believe it was in 2015, and we are in compliance with that. Finally, I would note that we use electrostatic precipitators they're often referred to as ESPs, to remove opacity or fly ash coming out of our stacks. In the old days, you may have seen soot that looked like it was coming out, black plumes. Those have been removed now due to electrostatic precipitators, which can remove about 98% of the particulate matter, sometimes even more, before it exits the stack.
Thank you. I saw pretty much what you said you did in the testimony, but you didn't have any numbers, and that was interesting.
Very good.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And does the company, whether that's you or someone within the company, kind of, I guess, keep your ear to the ground, stay on top of things to look to see what other technologies are out there that could enhance or maybe be less expensive to use?
Yes, sir. We're always looking at what other options may be out there. Based on industry knowledge and our benchmarking, certainly for the nitrogen oxide removal, SCR is considered the best way to remove the nitrogen oxides. And then the flue gas desulfurization is typically considered the best technology for sulfur dioxide removal. I think one of the things I would say is that we are constantly benchmarking with the vendors and with research institutes to see if there's something else that's out there. We've made a significant capital investment into the systems we have, and they're certainly meeting all of the requirements of our environmental regulations. So we believe that it's been to the benefit of the customers from a cost perspective and an environmental stewardship perspective.
And this is for your coal-fired plants and your gas?
Yes, and so most of my answer before was slanted towards the coal-fired units. On the gas side, you do still have some units on combined cycle that have SCR, and they typically have what's called low NOx burners coming out of the gas turbines, so you can really reduce that NOx. But of course, permits, especially on newer builds, have been tighter and tighter, so SCR is a way to get to the lower NOx emissions. The beauty of gas-fired generation is there's next to no sulfur in the fuel, so there's really no need to put any sulfur control equipment on those combined cycles. And, you know, the other thing I'd mention is that some of our gas turbines have the ability to burn both fuel oil and natural gas. If they burn fuel oil, typically you need water to be injected to for NOx control.
So with this emissions control technology and the removal rates you were talking about, do you still consider, Duke still considers these coal and gas facilities viable and reasonable alternatives?
Yes, sir. I think one of the great things about working for Duke Energy is we have a diverse fuel mix. And so the way I would answer your question is we're always looking out for the customers, both from reliable operation, from cost, and also not to be have too many of our generation assets in just one fuel technology. And the coal units have run quite well over their lives and are considered to still be an important part of our portfolio through this decade. And the integrated resource plans reflect that, even with some retirements that are predicted. But you know, it all comes back to taking good risk-based approaches on your maintenance and making sure that you're available when your customers need you to be there. The new combined cycles are certainly very efficient and newer, and their reliability has been reflected in that. But the coal units and the older units that we have on our system certainly are viable.
Good. And you had, I guess, extensive testimony where you talked about heat rates.
Yes, sir.
And I'm assuming that's directly related to the fuel type or quality of the fuel.
So the fuel type and quality and its heating value play into it. Yes, sir. That's the measure of efficiency. And you may have seen in my testimony that the heat rate for a coal-fired unit will tend to be a little higher than the heat rate for a combined cycle unit. And that's not a surprise. So our overall coal-fired heat rate was 9,813 BTUs per kilowatt hour, but Blues Creek, which is the most efficient unit on our DEC system, was at 9678 BTU per kilowatt hour. Conversely, though, the combined cycles, they have a better efficiency, so they're at 7,310 on average across the fleet. So we then look to dispatch on a combination of what the fuel cost is and the efficiency of the units is to meet the customer needs.
And that's where you were talking also about the BTUs generated or used per megawatt hour, I think.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And it seemed like it was 9,600 for coal or versus 7,000 something for the gas.
Yes. And what you'll see, like Blues Creek and Marshall units 3 and 4 are supercritical units, which mean that they run at an even better efficiency than some of the other coal peers that they have. So on a coal unit, you could see actually you could see anywhere in the 9,000s all the way up to 11,000.
So is it an accurate statement to say if it's using less BTUs to generate a megawatt of generation, megawatt hour generation, it's more efficient than one that uses more BTUs?
That's correct. Okay. Yes, sir. And one thing I probably should note, Blues Creek was the most active unit. I quoted its heat rate, but actually Cliffside 6, which is our newest coal plant that we have on our system, its design is actually in the 8,000s, so it's even better because of some outage times that we had on Cliffside versus the run times we had on Blues Creek. That's why I quoted Blues Creek in my testimony.
Okay. And relative to that heat, how does that affect, I guess, the life of the equipment? if the coal generation requires more BTUs, is the equipment, everything designed for the higher heat? Does that shorten the life the more heat you have? Or
No, all the designs should be there for it to have a strong life cycle because the materials and the redundancy is all intended to meet that heat load that you would have. And I mentioned supercritical, so we may have a higher pressure and temperature regime as we're going through some of the boiling than a subcritical coal unit. The designs reflect all of that. Also, I think you mentioned mechanical engineering. When I was in school, the idea was that these units might have a nominal life, and we tend to exceed the lives of those nominal design bases because the designs are so robust. One of the things you look at is fuel quality. The better the fuel quality, the easier it is to burn the fuel, and less throughput you need to have. That sometimes will wear out some rotating equipment, mills you use to grind the coal, if you have to send more through and it's got higher ash content. So our fuels group does a great job of trying to find the right cost, the right quality, and the compatibility to burn in these boilers. And so, like in the case of a Blues Creek, it's done quite well over its life, and we're proud of how they run, and they have the design and ability to be able to continue to run. Also, I conclude by saying our maintenance program drives us to do periodic inspections for material condition to make sure nothing is degraded to the point of being unsafe or unreliable.
you actually answered the question before I asked it, so that's good.
Very good.
Mr. Capps, I'm not ignoring you. I just really don't have anything. For whatever reason, I just like talking to mechanical engineers. So, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Commissioner Justin Williams?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, gentlemen. How's it going?
Good morning. Very good.
You may have mentioned this, but do both of you live in the service territory?
I do, yes.
Okay. So when you go to happy hour, how often do you talk about electronic or electrostatic participants?
Depends which crowd I'm with.
Yeah, not with me.
I just have a few general questions. Do both of you believe that the company has done everything possible to provide safe and reliable energy in a prudent manner?
Yes, sir, I do.
All right.
As do I.
All right. When it comes to some of the environmental protections in place, do you feel like the company is being responsible as it comes to whatever responsibility it believes it has to protecting the environment or being a good steward of the environment?
I do, Commissioner, and I would say that our permits are one thing that we have to be in compliance with, but we also have internal metrics around reportable environmental events, and we do a lot of, even for lower level spills that may not ever even require reporting, we often do cause analysis and operating lessons learned because environmental is that important to us.
All right.
And Commissioner Williams, when we talk about safety, I mean, in that bucket, we put personal safety, nuclear safety, and environmental safety. So that's the level that we try to hold it to in the operation.
All right. Is there anything that you two believe the company could have done differently or could do differently in the future to reduce the rising fuel costs that are being passed on to customers, ratepayers at every level?
I mean, I would say no, sir, from my perspective, but that's certainly not my area of expertise.
I believe that we've run the fleet efficiently. One thing that is certainly on our minds is the potential for carbon dioxide regulation, which, is something where if you can find a way to operate even just a little more efficiently, you have a win-win. Lower costs to customers and lower carbon dioxide emissions. So it's something that we are constantly looking at. Within my organization, we have a group that monitors the heat rate of our facilities, and we have regular what we call plant health meetings with each of the fossil plants, and we'll go over any degraders that may have been there. So if you think I could be at this optimum point of generation, but maybe I had some losses, some of those losses could be uncontrollable to the plant. Some of them could be controllable. We try to review those and operate the units as best as possible. I think that we'll continue to have a focus on this as we move forward too.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Commissioners? Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. And thank you guys for being here. My questions really are for you, Mr. Capps. Just wanted to hear a little bit more about the Oconee Unit 2 and the outages that have occurred there. If there are any updates that you can give, just a little more background and info on that, please.
Yes, sir, I can. So Oconee Unit 2 had a refueling outage the latter part of 2021, November into December. The unit had actually operated a little over 700 days when it went into the refueling outage, so operated very, very reliable. When we were coming out of that refueling outage, we were at somewhere around 70% power. We were doing a test on a reactor protective channel. There are 4 channels. If you get an input on 2 channels at the same time, it trips the reactor. We were testing the 2 Bravo channel, and we got a spike on a nuclear instrument on the 2 Alpha channel, and that satisfied the 2 or 4 coincidence logic, and the plant tripped. So driven by equipment, there's a device called a linear amplifier that we replace to correct the spiking. And I would also add that was the first Unit 2 reactor trip in almost 14 years. So the unit had been very, very reliable. And then, subsequently in February, we had 2 trips. We had a 7 kV fuse that failed and caused a loss of all reactor coolant pumps and caused a reactor trip. And then when we were starting back up from that outage, we had a feed water control valve that had a component in it called a shuttle valve. It's basically a big valve, and you put air on it to close it or air on it to open it. And this little shuttle valve sits there and moves back and forth to port the air to the open or closed side. That shuttle valve stuck with the valve open more than it needed to be, and the operators manually tripped the plant. So certainly 3 reactor trips in 3 months, not what we would expect, and not what we owe you all or what we owe the customers. If you look at our performance and you say, well, is there an anomaly? That would be the anomaly. I mean, going 14 years with no trips, and then having 3 in 3 months. The other thing that'll make you scratch your head a little bit is you got Unit 1 and Unit 3 sitting on either side that have continued to operate at 100%, no problems, no issues, same people, same procedures, same process, but certainly a different outcome. And I will tell you, we have taken every opportunity to learn all we can from those. We've got an equipment reliability excellence plan that we put together as a result of that. Some of it focuses on the equipment aspects, the technical aspects, and then some of it focuses on behaviors and our actions or our behaviors as leaders in influencing outcomes.
Okay, very good. So 14 years is a pretty good track record, and so
I don't want to get it all back in 3 months.
So how about the units 1 and 3 that, like you said, sit on either side? Of the long-term track records kind of comparable, or?
Yes, sir. They have operated very well. Actually, a very low we call it online reliability factor or force loss. Very low force loss rate on both Oconee Unit 1 and Unit 3. And to be quite honest, since February until now, all 3 units have operated very well. Certainly issues, but nothing beyond what you would expect in operating 3 nuclear units.
Okay. So let me ask you probably unrelated question. Do you watch the developments in terms of the potential new technology in the small modular units and things of that nature? Any thoughts, comments on that, the possibility of those being useful at any time? Just any sort of an update?
Yes, sir. We certainly do watch it. We have certainly been engaged with it. We've kind of taken a perspective at this point. We'll talk to everybody, right? I mean, anybody that wants to talk to us about their technology, their product, their plant, then we'll give them an audience and have a discussion. And there are a number of us in nuclear who have taken, they call them advisory committees, but utility committee roles with the new reactor vendors. If we're asked, we participate just to be able to provide our input, and it gives us a perspective of what they're doing from the periodic touch point. So, I mean, I would tell you at this point we're in the seek to understand phase relative to the technology, but we're certainly involved in discussions.
Okay. So let me ask a question. I know you're not the fuel purchasing person, but you're the one that's there using the fuel, keeping the things running. So is your inventory level, you think, pretty good for the nuclear fuel?
Yes, sir, it is. We generally rely on long-term fuel contracts. A gentleman named Matt Cameron will also testify at the hearing. He's the fuels guru. So he certainly has a better perspective for that than I do. But we have traditionally relied on long-term contracts, which has served us well in ensuring that we have a reliable supply.
And do you have any thoughts or concerns in connection with so much of the enriched nuclear fuel coming from Russia?
No, sir. I would not say concerns, but it has certainly been a topic of conversation for both us and the industry.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Vice Chair Powers?
Thank you. Just following up on that, Mr. Capps, you've had some bad luck recently. When that happens, how does Duke pick it up? I mean, you notify this guy. Where does the balance of power come from that all of a sudden you're not generating?
Yes, sir. There's essentially an energy control center that maintains the overall system. And if we lose generation, then they have the responsibility to get generation on in the short term to account for that. And usually what you would see happen is there would be an immediate reaction in the near term to cover whatever the megawatt loss was. And that may be, that may be hydro, gas turbines, things you can put on immediately. And then that gives you time to figure out, okay, if it's going to be a 5-day outage, what's the right strategy for the next few days? But there's an energy control center that manages that for us.
So gas is more likely, or hydro is more likely to be the quick solution.
I mean,
you don't crank up a coal station anymore than it already is, or how do you do that?
A lot of the coal stations have a longer warm-up time. If you have one that's already online, you may be able to, but not at full load, you may be able to ramp up to cover some of the load. But typically, gas turbines can be, simple cycle gas turbines can be started right away. and we can start other hydro units provided we have the water right away. And as Mr. Capps mentioned, the calls with the Energy Center, Energy Control Center, typically happen at a minimum daily to look at the load and be prepared if there are any upsets, and then in dynamic situations like that, they reach out immediately so customers are not impacted.
So there's constant contact.
Yes, sir. Yes,
sir. Okay, good. And Mr. Walsh, I think I had one question. I was listening to your answers to Commissioner Caston about capturing or reducing these different chemicals and things. And you mentioned mercury. Where does it go? Where does all that go when you stop it, when you lower it, reduce it?
So it's been a few years since I've had to work in this area, but typically what you try to do is oxidize the mercury, and then through the flue gas desulfurization process, you have ultimately what comes out the stack, which you don't want it to be mercury, and then you have what can settle out. And in some cases, we have even built wetlands in the past where the mercury is captured and is sent with an effluent that the wetlands actually grow from. And then in other cases, it's captured in ways that it will not be able to be released in the atmosphere, more in the other byproducts. And then there are rules on what we have to do to make sure that it's not, released in any harmful way to the public. So you don't get away with not emitting it from the stack, but emitting it in other manners. And so,
okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. That's all
Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Good morning to
Good
both
morning.
of you. Mr. Capps, you, on page 6 and 7, you have a conversation about the nuclear fleet. You probably don't need to turn to it, but I do. So you have a conversation about industry averages and how Duke operates relative to those industry averages, and you talk about key performance indicators. And I understand the capacity factor thresholds that you present, but are there other, would you talk some more about what those key performance indicators are for us? And is there a way to understand, perhaps in future cases, more about what those are, what those components are?
Yes, ma'am. And I don't know that I can rattle them all off the top of my head, but I'll talk about a couple of them. There are actually 10 that pretty much the entire industry consistently measures. There's a criteria for what factors in, and I mean, one of those is personal safety. And you kind of think, well, why personal safety? But you learn those behaviors spill over into the rest of the business. If you can have good behaviors for that, you tend to have good behaviors for work quality and other things. Obviously, in a nuclear facility, from a health and safety standpoint, radiological dose is an area that we measure. So the amount of dose received over an operating cycle essentially is how we look at it. There's a measure for reactor trips. There's a measure for the actual number is called online reliability loss factor, but it's loss generation. Other than refueling outages, what loss generation did you have? So those are examples, but there are 10. And I mean, cost is also a piece that we look at to say, all right, how do we compare to the industry in terms of cost per megawatt? So it's just a way of knowing, where have we done fairly well? Where do we have gaps that we need to work on? And then I would tell you beyond that, who do we need to go talk to and figure out, all right, they've achieved this outcome. What can we learn from them and incorporate into our business to get better?
Would you consider whether in future hearings like this, that information might be helpful and shareable, even if it needs to be confidential?
Yes, ma'am. We can talk about figuring out how to do that.
Okay. Thank you very much. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Commissioners, any further questions? Mr. Capps, I had a question, and I just wanted to congratulate y'all on the Catawba one, the short refueling. That was good, but in that, on your testimony on page 10, you reference a low dose record for a Catawba refueling outage. What is a low dose record?
It's the amount of radiation dose that was received in the outage.
By your personnel?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And I mean, there's an industry standard that's less than 40 rem. So that's kind of the cutoff for we'll just say good or bad. I think this particular outage at Catawba was less than 20 rem.
Okay.
It was a very good outage for us in a number of ways, including.
Is that a
radiation.
cumulative number of all the workers, or is that per worker, or how is that?
It is a cumulative number for all the workers from the start of the outage when the generator breakers open till the end of the outage when the generator breakers close.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioners, anything further for this panel? Commissioner Williams, your light's on. Get there. Any redirect?
No redirect.
Okay. Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony this morning. You may stand down.
Chair Belzer, we would request that Mr. Walsh and Mr. Capps be excused.
My normal admonition is at your risk. If something comes up later and they're not available, it's your risk. So
Understood, Chair Belzer. Thank you.
thank you. Next panel. Are we on time?
Madam Chair, the company would next call Mr. Matthew Cameron and Mr. John Vernrami as a panel.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Court reporter will swear the witnesses in.
If you raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Cameron. Would you please state your name for the record?
Good morning. My name is Matthew Cameron.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I am the manager of nuclear fuel supply for Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas.
How long have you worked in the nuclear industry?
Approximately 16 years.
What is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in nuclear engineering from Purdue University and a master's degree in business administration from Wake Forest University. I am also a registered professional engineer in the state of North Carolina.
Please describe any prior roles you have held that are relevant to your testimony in this proceeding.
I began my career with the company as an engineer in Duke Energy Corporation's Safety Analysis Group in 2006, where I performed plant response and accident analysis. I became a registered professional engineer in the state of North Carolina in 2011. In 2012, I assumed the lead for purchasing uranium and conversion services.
Thank you. Please describe your current responsibilities at the company.
I am directly responsible for purchasing uranium conversion services, enrichment services, and fuel fabrication.
Madam Chair, at this time, based upon Mr. Cameron's extensive experience in matters related to nuclear fuel and nuclear fuel procurement, I propose to tender Mr. Cameron as an expert in the field of nuclear fuel procurement.
Is there any voir dire for the witness as regarding his expertise? Hearing none, Mr. Cameron will be accepted as an expert in nuclear fuel procurement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cameron, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 8 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the Commission in this proceeding?
I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony this morning, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Cameron's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Cameron's direct pre-filed testimony will be admitted into the record as if given orally.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cameron, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 2 exhibits that were attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes,
Do you have any changes to those exhibits at this time?
I do not.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Cameron's pre-filed exhibits be entered as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Cameron's pre-filed direct exhibits, I believe 1 and 2, will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 4 and entered into the record of the case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cameron, would you please provide a summary of your testimony at this time?
Certainly. The purpose of my testimony is to provide information regarding DEC's nuclear fuel purchasing practices, provide costs for the June 1, 2021 through May 31, 2022 review period, and describe changes for the October 1, 2022 through September 30, 2023 billing period. DEC's nuclear fuel procurement practices involve computing near and long-term consumption forecasts, establishing nuclear system inventory levels, projecting required annual fuel purchases, requesting proposals from qualified suppliers, negotiating a portfolio of long-term contracts from diverse sources of supply, and monitoring deliveries against contract commitments. Consistent with industry practices, long-term contracts are used extensively to cover forward requirements and reduce exposure to possible price volatility and supply disruptions from any single source of supply. DEC's portfolio of diversified contract pricing yielded an average unit cost of $33.80 per pound for uranium concentrates during the review period, representing a decrease of 22% per pound from the prior review period. The average unit cost of DEC's purchases of enrichment services during the review period decreased 1% to $100.67 per separative work unit. The delivered costs for fabrication and conversion services have a limited impact on the overall fuel expense rate, given that the dollar amounts for these purchases represent a substantially smaller percentage of DEC's total direct fuel cost relative to uranium concentrates or enrichment. The company anticipates nuclear fuel costs on a cents per kilowatt hour basis through the next billing period to increase. Although costs of certain components of nuclear fuel are expected to increase in future years, nuclear fuel costs on a cents per kilowatt hour basis will likely continue to be a fraction of the cost of fossil fuel. Because fuel is typically expensed over 2 to 3 operating cycles, roughly 3 to 6 years, DEC's nuclear fuel expense in the upcoming billing period will be determined by the cost of fuel assemblies loaded into the reactors during the review period, as well as prior periods. The company anticipates the average fuel expense will increase from 0.575 cents per kilowatt hour incurred in the review period to approximately 0.580 cents per kilowatt hour in the billing period. This concludes my testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. Mr. Verderami, would you please state your name for the record?
John Verderami.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Duke Energy Carolinas. I'm the Vice President of Fuels and System Optimization.
How long have you worked in the energy industry?
Approximately 20 years.
What is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Arts degree in Economics and a Master's in Business Administration and Finance.
Please describe your responsibilities at the company.
As Vice President of the Fuels and Systems Optimization Group, I oversee all aspects of the overall strategic direction and commercial management of the purchase, delivery, and storage of fossil fuels that Duke Energy regulated utilities use for the generation of electricity. This includes monitoring and providing strategic guidance in the various areas of fuel markets, including feedback regarding supply and demand, price quality, availability, economics, and deliverability. In addition, I'm responsible for the overall strategic direction of the fleet's power trading, system optimization, energy supply analytics, and contract administration functions.
Madam Chair, given Mr. Verderami's extensive experience in fuel and reagent procurement, I propose to tender him as an expert in the field of coal, natural gas, and reagent procurement.
Any voir dire for Mr. Verderami on his experience and qualifications? Hearing none, Mr. Verderami will be accepted as an expert in the area of coal, natural gas, and reagent procurement.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Verderami, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 12 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony this morning, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Verderami's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Verderami's pre-filed direct testimony will be accepted into the record as if given orally.
Thank you. Mr. Verderami, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 2 exhibits that were attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
I did.
Do you have any changes to those exhibits at this time?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Verderami's 2 pre-filed exhibits be entered as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Verderami's 2 exhibits will be marked as a composite exhibit 5 and entered into the record of this proceeding.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Verderami, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 6 pages of rebuttal testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed rebuttal testimony this morning, would your answers be the same?
They would.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Verderami's pre-filed rebuttal testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Verderami's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Verderami, would you please provide a summary of your testimony at this time?
Sure. The purpose of my direct testimony is to describe DEC's fossil fuel purchasing practices, provide fossil fuel costs for the period June 1, 2021 through May 31, 2022, and describe projected changes forthcoming for the period of October 1, 22 through September 30, 2023. DEC's average delivered cost of coal per ton for the review period was $80.53 per ton, compared to $80.65 per ton in the prior review period, representing a decrease of approximately 0.1%. This includes an average transportation cost of $30.30 per ton in the review period, compared to $32.32 per ton in the prior review period, representing a decrease of approximately 6%. The company's average cost of gas purchase for the review period was $4.96 per MMBTU, as compared to $3.16 per MMBTU in the prior review period, representing an increase of 57%. The cost of gas is inclusive of gas supply, transportation, storage, and financial hedging. DEC's coal burn for the review period was 4.4 million tons, compared to a coal burn of 6.9 million tons in the prior review period, representing a decrease of 37%. The company consumed approximately 217 million MBTU of natural gas in the review period, compared to 133.1 million MBTU in the prior review period, representing an increase of 63%. Changes in coal and natural gas burns were primarily driven by increased demand from the economic rebound experienced following the COVID-19 pandemic shutdowns, as well as escalating coal commodity prices in late 2021 and early 22, which offset the overall increase in natural gas prices, limiting gas to coal generation switching. Coal markets continue to be distressed for a variety of reasons, and the coal supply chain experienced increasing challenges throughout 2021 and 22, as historically low utility stockpiles, combined with rapidly increasing demand for coal, both domestically and internationally, made procuring additional coal supply increasingly challenging. Coal producers have been unable to respond to the rapid rise in demand due to capacity constraints from labor and resource shortages, which drove domestic and export coal prices to record levels. The utility sector's declining demand for coal has also driven rail transportation providers to modify their business models to be less dependent on coal-related transportation, and the company experienced increased delivery delays created by rail transportation shortages in 2021 and the first half of 2022. DEC's projections for the billing period include approximately 7.3 million tons of coal and 178.3 million MBTU of natural gas consumed. These projections are subject to change due to multiple factors, including but not limited to exposure to market prices, the amount of Central Appalachian coal DEC is able to purchase and deliver, and the non-Central Appalachian coal DEC is able to consume. Changes in transportation rates, performance contract deliveries by suppliers and railroads that may be missed, potential additional costs associated with suppliers' compliance with legal and statutory changes, changes in actual delivered fuel costs, and weather-driven demand. This concludes my direct testimony summary.
Mr. Verderami, would you go ahead and provide a summary of your rebuttal testimony as well?
Sure. The purpose of my rebuttal testimony is to respond to the recommendations and testimony offered by Ronald Binns on behalf of South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and Upstate Forever. Witness Binns has not recommended any changes to the company's proposed fuel rates. Rather, he focuses on the recent volatility of fuel prices and offers suggestions regarding solar and storage resources for consideration in the company's long-term planning process. The company generally agrees that renewable energy resources are increasingly important and growing components of the electric grid. However, the company believes the fuel rider established in South Carolina Code 58-27-865 is not the appropriate form in which to evaluate these resources. Rather, the company believes the South Carolina General Assembly intended for the Commission to address resource planning in the Integrated Resource Plan framework established in accordance with South Carolina Code Section 5837-40. I agree with Witness Binns that natural gas prices are volatile and have increased over the last year. We also seem to agree at a high level on the supply and demand pressures affecting natural gas commodity prices. However, I do not agree that natural gas prices in the Southeast are not being driven up by pipeline constraints. Based on his testimony, Witness Binns appears to only consider the underlying Henry Hub gas price without accounting for locational basis pricing, which is directly impacted by locational pipeline constraints, including those experienced at Transco Zone 5, DEC's delivery point in the Carolinas. Witness Binns' assertion that there is no separate gas pricing hub for North and South Carolina is incorrect. Natural gas that is delivered in the Carolinas on Transco does not utilize the same pricing as Henry Hub. Gas delivered into the Carolinas utilizes the pricing index Transco Zone 5 South. Transco Zone 5 has recently had some of the highest regional gas price indices in the nation due to the lack of pipeline capacity delivering to the Carolinas. Although there is no guarantee that increased pipeline capacity to the Southeast would lower the global commodity price for natural gas, the opportunity to increase gas flows into the Southeast via new pipeline infrastructure would increase access to alternative lower-cost gas supply in the region, while potentially decreasing congestion at Transco Zone 5 and lowering delivered Zone 5 basis pricing to more moderate levels. This would directly impact DEC's existing generation portfolio and benefit DEC's South Carolina customers. The company has made and continues to make every effort to minimize fuel costs to customers while providing reliable and cost-effective service. This concludes my rebuttal testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Verderami. Madam Chair, Mr. Cameron and Mr. Verderami are now available to answer any questions of council or the commission.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Energy Users Committee?
No questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Say CCL Upstate Forever?
Good morning, Mr. Verderami. Apologies, Mr. Cameron. I don't believe I have any questions for you. Again, I'm Kate Mixon on behalf of CCL and Upstate Forever. I appreciate your time today. The company is proposing a 13.2% increase to residential customer rates in this proceeding. Is that correct?
I believe subject to the stipulation, it would be less than 13.2%, closer to 10%, I believe.
But that would just be for this year, correct? That lower percentage would be for this year. The stipulation does not reduce the amount of money that the company is seeking to recover from customers. Is that correct?
Oh, that's true.
Okay. So
just a moment. Mr. Verderami, I need to ask for you to speak into the microphone, please.
Sure, I'm sorry.
And so I guess prior to the stipulation, that would have been about $15 per month for the average customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours a month. Is that right?
That's correct.
and I believe it's somewhere around $12 now, under the stipulation if it were to be approved. Does that sound
Again,
right to
that's
you?
my understanding. I was not part of the negotiation, but that's what I read. I read it when you heard it.
Both of those numbers, those are a larger increase than either of the company's last two rate cases. Isn't that correct?
Actually, I don't have the increases for the actual rate cases. You mean
Okay.
the fuel cases or rate cases?
Well, this is certainly much larger than any fuel proceeding in the last decade. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. So you would agree this requested increase is pretty unprecedented, right?
I think the entire energy complex is in an unprecedented condition.
Okay. And the proposed increase, it's being driven primarily by increases in the cost of gas and coal over the review period. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I want to start with some of your testimony on coal prices. On pages 6 to 7 of your direct testimony, you go into some depth about the distress and increased volatility in the coal market. And in fact, you list 8 separate factors that are driving that volatility. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Those include, among others, deteriorated financial health of coal suppliers, uncertainty around regulations for mining operations and power plants, changing global demand, less access to investor financing for coal producers, shifts away from coal usage and electricity production, and labor and resource constraints. Does that sound right to you?
Sounds familiar.
You would agree the company can't influence any of those 8 factors on its own in any significant way, right?
No, I think as an industry-wide, we can't influence those factors, but on a supplier basis, I believe we can.
Okay. Sorry, could you repeat yourself?
Sure. So I wasn't clear there. So what I meant was, in a world of dwindling coal suppliers, right? Part of the challenge is going to be keep the viability of these suppliers going forward. So I believe we can impact some of those stressors contractually, strategically.
Okay, you could impact them, but the company only has so much control over those factors, right?
From a market perspective, yes.
Right. There are many other utilities or other purchasers that would also affect the viability of coal producers, right? So I guess, would you agree the company is primarily able to react to the risk that's presented by those factors rather than being able to kind of proactively change those factors themselves?
So I'd say by and large, utilities are price takers in the fuel market. Right?
Okay.
We can mitigate some of that impact, like I said, through either contractually or through hedging programs.
Would you agree that some of those factors driving this uncertainty and distress in the coal markets are part of the reason that the company has been seeking to reduce its reliance on its coal fleet over time?
I think it's a factor in the devolving coal industry is somewhat of a factor in weeding off of coal as a primary fuel, just from a fuel security perspective.
So turning to some of your testimony around the natural gas supply market, your testimony also describes a number of factors that are driving volatility and increasing prices in the gas market. And those include global supply and demand factors, growth in export demand and capabilities, gas production, slow response to rising prices. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And over the past year, these factors have resulted in a lot of volatility in the price of gas and substantial price increases that are well beyond what the company forecasted. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you acknowledge in your rebuttal testimony that gas prices are somewhat inherently volatile. Is that right? Okay. The company also doesn't have the ability to control these factors that are driving gas price volatility or fuel cost increases, right?
On global perspective, no.
Okay, and so again, as you said before, utilities are price takers in that market. And so the utility is largely responding to those factors rather than affecting them proactively.
I would not say that that there's no proactive activity involved, but again, all utilities are going to be, unless you own the mine, right, or the gas well, you are a price taker.
Okay. And so I guess part of the response that the company would have to kind of respond to the risks associated with those factors is the company's hedging program, right?
That's correct.
And you'd agree that Duke has a relatively sophisticated hedging program in place, wouldn't you?
I believe it has a robust and mature hedging program, yes.
But given the substantial increase that Duke is proposing in this case, wouldn't you agree that even a robust hedging program can only protect customers to a certain extent?
Depending on how much is hedged, yes. But I will say that, and this doesn't necessarily line up completely with the reconciliation period, but in 2022, the realized savings from that hedging program is over $800 million for the Carolinas. And the value of the future positions we hold is over $1.3 billion. Those are direct offsets to fuel.
Okay, so the company's hedging program did prevent the increase in this case from being more than is proposed.
And that's what hedging does, right? It provides some level of moderation to valleys and peaks.
Okay. Now, the company does exercise control over its own resource mix, doesn't it?
Yes.
And that resource mix ultimately affects what fuel-related costs that the company incurs and passes on to customers, right?
Yes.
From your perspective, so if the company had less coal and natural gas on its system, you would have less fuel cost risk to try and mitigate or hedge against. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Okay. So now turning to some of your testimony regarding pipeline constraints, you testify that pipeline constraints are a factor in driving prices up in the Southeast, right?
Yes.
So going to try and put together two different pieces of your testimony here. So in your direct testimony, and I believe this is on page 8, you discuss the growing need for pipeline infrastructure from Appalachia due to challenges with permits and regulatory approval. And in your rebuttal testimony, the need to increase gas flows into the Southeast via new pipeline infrastructure. Kind of putting two and two together, am I correct that you are perhaps referring to the Mountain Valley Pipeline or MVP project?
We feel the Mountain Valley Pipeline is the most least cost solution to increasing some of these flows into Transco Zone 5 into the Carolinas.
Okay. So MVP, once in service, that would move Appalachian shale gas into the Southeast region, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I'd like to kind of unpack how that project might affect prices a little bit. So as you noted, currently the company procures its gas off the Transco pipeline, and particularly its delivery point for the Carolinas is at Transco Zone 5. Is that right?
For delivered gas, yes.
Okay. You would agree that overall gas prices across the country have gone up over the past year, right?
Absolutely.
But during particularly during some kind of high demand periods, there has been a premium for gas delivered at Zone 5 compared with other pricing locations.
There has.
Okay. And your opinion is that those higher prices are in part due to those pipeline constraints that limit the ability to move, or I guess the Southeast ability to access some of the lower priced gas in the Appalachia region.
I think the signpost is that there is a basis between the Henry Club gas price and Zone 5 in the summertime. This is a phenomenon we've not seen before. We were used to seeing a basis in the wintertime when gas competes with heating. But in the summertime, this is new. And I think this is a signpost that the region is reaching its limit of deliverable gas.
Okay. So I want to start with kind of supply cost, or the cost for the fuel itself. Would you generally agree that the more connected that a supply market is, meaning the easier that it is to move gas from that supply region to other areas, that the more comparable that the prices in those different markets tend to be.
Yes, constraints are what drives the dislocation.
Right. And so, for instance, because export production facilities in the U.S. have really ramped up their ability to send gas elsewhere, that's been a major factor in driving some of our domestic gas prices closer to kind of the global commodity prices. Is that correct?
There has been demand for LNG, absolutely, but that's capped at the liquefaction limit of about 13 BCF a day. So I think there's only so much impact that can have, but I believe it will have an impact going forward for the next several years.
Right. Would you agree that the Appalachia region is currently not particularly well connected?
There is definitely more gas available than takeaway to deliver.
And do you agree that the fact that it's currently not very well connected may be a factor in why prices for gas from that region are currently lower than some other areas?
Yes.
And again, MVP will increase the ability to move gas from the Appalachia region, right? So couldn't that pipeline going into service actually reduce the current discount, for lack of a better word, for gas from that region?
So I believe that the current production in Appalachia is constrained as well by that limited takeaway, and that there is more gas available to fill that void. So I believe there will continue to be a discount to Appalachia gas.
Okay. You'd also agree, wouldn't you, that just under kind of basic principles of supply and demand, if a region has increased demand for gas, that would create upward pressure on gas prices?
If there's a supply constraint, yes.
Okay. So if there was an increase in natural gas demand in the Southeast due to utilities building more combined cycle or combustion turbine gas plants, that could put upward pressure on gas prices, couldn't it?
Okay, but I think the increase in gas usage in the Carolinas and the Southeast is as much around the cost of coal and coal retirements as it is increased or expected, build in natural gas.
Okay. So I guess, can you say for certain that MVP going into service will actually lower the company's fuel prices?
Nothing for certain. I've been in this business too long to make that prediction, but it is my opinion that yes, it would decrease, to your logic, it would decrease the congestion and the stress into the Southeast and have a corresponding impact on prices.
Okay. So that past line of questions, that was just about the cost of the fuel itself, but those aren't the only fuel-related costs that get passed on to customers, right? I guess I can go on. Duke also recovers the cost of transportation for that fuel, meaning what the company pays for the privilege of moving the fuel that it purchases from its origination point to where you take delivery, right?
Excuse me, yes.
Okay. Wouldn't you agree that the cost of transportation along Transco is significantly cheaper than transportation costs will be on MVP?
Transco is completely subscribed pipeline. MVP, in the diligence that we performed, MVP was cheaper than a Transco solution for Appalachian gas or from more gas from the Gulf.
Okay. Well, so MVP is one of, if not the most expensive greenfield pipeline projects in the U.S., isn't it?
I don't have the knowledge to compare.
Okay. Well, its current expected cost is sitting at about $6.6 billion. Does that sound right to you?
It does.
Okay. And higher project costs would lead to higher transportation costs along that pipeline, right?
So not necessarily. Some of that capacity is already owned and under a tariff rate.
To your knowledge, has Duke entered into any agreements to secure capacity on MVP?
So we have entered into an agreement that gives us access to Appalachian gas through MVP if MVP goes into service. It's a fuel supply agreement.
Okay. And so the company has entered into a contract for, I guess, a precedent agreement for firm capacity along MVP.
Not a precedent agreement, no.
Okay. So if the company were to enter into contracts for firm capacity along MVP, those are fixed costs that have to be paid no matter what,
They
right?
are.
And that's true even if the company doesn't use that capacity and actually purchases fuel from elsewhere. Is that right?
Yes.
And those fixed costs are also passed on to customers, correct?
As well as the savings and the access to the less expensive gas and the reliability afforded by and the security afforded by that fixed transport.
Okay. So even if MVP does lower the company's fuel supply costs somewhat, which, as you said, you can't say would be the case for certain, isn't it possible that the transportation and the other fixed costs could make gas from MVP just as, if not more expensive than what the company currently pays for gas?
It's hypothetically possible, yes.
Okay.
But there are other benefits, as I said, to that transportation.
Okay. I guess, so you're not saying then that if MVP is built, that this commission and Duke's customers can expect that fuel prices will go back down?
I do expect it. I can't guarantee it.
Okay, let me actually phrase that slightly differently. Do you think that this commission and Duke's customers can expect their fuel riders to go back down?
Now, again, I mean, everything is relative. I would say absent MVP, we would expect the riders to be lower with MVP in service.
Okay, do you think that those prices will go back down to where they were in, let's say, 2019?
No, I think there are, I don't think we're going to see that kind of oversupply. That the 2019 prices were an artifact of an overproduction condition in fuel in the gas market that I don't think we're going to see again in the near future. I think producers have certainly gotten religion and been forced to get religion around how they deploy capital, how they punch holes in the ground, and how much gas is actually provided. So I don't think that. If the forward curve is any indication, we're not going to see 2019 prices in the next 5 years.
Okay. So would you agree then that it's uncertain whether MVP or any other pipeline project will actually reduce prices, as they're seen by customers in any significant way?
Oh, I do believe more access to the Marcellus Shale, plentiful gas, will decrease prices more than they would be absent that gas infrastructure.
Okay. But again, you can't say for certain.
I don't think anybody could. I wouldn't sit here wouldn't be sitting here if I could. I'd be in a beach somewhere.
And so you'd agree that, though, even if there are pipeline constraints, the company itself doesn't have any control over whether or when or how quickly that new interstate pipelines get built, right?
No, we don't, other than when we support them through contracting to build them.
Does this commission have any control over that?
I believe the commission has control through its review of the prudency of the decisions we make at the time we make them.
Right, but this commission has no role in whether or not the Mountain Valley Pipeline is permitted and goes into service, correct?
I think their voice they don't have a regulatory role, no, but I think their voice has a role in public opinion.
Okay, so to the extent the company can't control whether there will be additional pipeline infrastructure in place or what its cost impact will be, and the company also can't control natural gas prices, it would be pretty risky to rely on those external factors as a way to lower its customers' costs, wouldn't it?
No, I don't believe so. I believe any of the decisions we make around what generation we build or what fuel procurement actions we take are based on the knowledge and the expertise we have now and the facts pattern that we have in front of us now. So.
Okay, but you would agree, again, the company can't control those
Company can-
factors and is largely responding to them by trying to mitigate the risks associated with them, but it can't actually change those factors.
That's right. Our role is to mitigate that exposure.
Okay. Mr. Verderami, did you read the portion of Mr. Benz's direct testimony? And I think it's at the bottom of page 35, going on to 36, where he describes Xcel Energy's steel for fuel strategy to shift away from gas ownership and toward renewable energy.
I did read it.
If Duke had to pay for its own fuel costs instead of passing all of those costs along to its customers, don't you think that would make new investments in gas look a lot riskier to the company?
So I really don't accept this whole moral hazard of risk shifting in Mr. Benz's testimony. I think the fortunes of the company and the customers are inextricably twined, right? We make decisions based on the long-term best interests of our customers. So the reason that I think fuel recovery clauses have come into play and they're widely accepted is because of the volatility of fuel as a component of base rates. So no, I don't think, if there was, I think we still would look at those decisions the same.
Okay, but to be clear, the company currently does not pay for any of its own fuel costs. Is that right?
True, fuel is a pass-through.
Okay, and the company does earn a return on any investment that it makes in capital infrastructure, including building the plants that burn that fuel. Is that right?
It does.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Verderami. Those are all of my questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. ORS, any questions?
No questions.
Before we get into commissioner questions, let's take a 10-minute break. Let's return at, 13-minute break. Let's return at 11:55, please. Thank you. Welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. Continuation of hearing in docket 2022-3-E. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Caston, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Chair Belser, and appearing virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin. We've concluded with cross by SACE CCL Upstate Forever, Office of Regulatory Staff. You had no questions. Commissioners, questions for these witnesses. Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. So, Mr. Verdemeer, is that correct pronunciation or somewhere close?
That's close. My dad says Verderami, but
Verderami, okay.
I've heard a million different variations, Commissioner, so.
Well, so let me ask you a question in connection with the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Are there any recent updates as to what's going on with the status, how things are moving forward or not moving forward? Any info you can give us on that?
Sure, absolutely. So, yeah, Mountain Valley Pipeline certainly has its challenge, has had its challenges, but we believe actually it's the likelihood has improved in the last several months. Setbacks to their crossing Jefferson Forest and biological opinion and incidental take applications being vacated, but those have been reestablished for review, of course. The FERC 7C extension was granted, so I mean, remember the pipeline is 303 miles long. It's 94% complete. It's got about 20 miles left of drilling, somewhere between 4 and 6 months worth of work. So I think probably the most intriguing development recently has been potential permitting reform in Senator Manchin's stopgap bill. So I think that might, if that could move the proceedings from the federal agencies or back to the federal agencies away from being mired in court. I think that that's positive probably for the project. So we feel we're still relatively confident that in Equitrans's in-service date of sometime in the second half of 23.
Okay. And in your opinion, does that project potentially have other potential benefits, anything along the lines of economic development in the Carolinas, particularly South Carolina? Or do you see those constraints that we have now as limiting new companies coming in or anything along those lines?
I think to the extent that it increases the throughput through North Carolina, whether it's to the Gulf or to the LNG or where or south of the Carolinas, yeah, I think it has the same arguments that were made around ACP apply to MVP as well. More cheaper gas, will be will make investments I think attractive to in that space.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Cameron, you were talking about the expected upward trends in the nuclear fuel costs. Can you give more information on that? What do you think is what's driving that?
I believe it's twofold. The first is the situation in Ukraine. We've seen a lot of Western utilities start to diversify away from Russia, which has brought demand into the Western market, and that will increase prices until supply can be brought online to meet that demand. We're also seeing, at least on the mining side, traditional mines are rolling off. They've been mining for 40 years, and to replace that capacity, we need new mines online, and those just come at a higher cost.
Okay. And so you said, I think I heard you say that companies are moving away from Russia and not taking as much enriched uranium from Russia. Is that what you're saying? So the places the prices are going up. Is that?
We are seeing utilities diversify away from Russia, and it's not just uranium, it's conversion and enrichment services as well. And there is, especially in the services side, conversion and enrichment, only a limited capacity, and it takes a long time to bring new capacity online.
Okay. So in connection with the small modular units, my understanding is that they are being developed, but the fuel is not exactly the same as the traditional. Is that correct? Do you know anything about that?
There are two different types of small modular being marketed today. One is basically a scaled down version of our existing plants. So light water reactors, they use the same fuel cycle that we do today. The other is the more advanced, and they do use what's called HALEU, so it's high assay. It's enrichment up to 20%, and that would be a new fuel cycle, or that we would need new enrichment facilities to handle that material.
Okay, so those sorts of facilities are not really in existence right now, or would be improvements to existing facilities, or what?
There would need to be licensing changes to existing facilities and a further build out of the current technology.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioners, Commissioner Caston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Verderami, I don't know if it's morning or afternoon yet, but good one of those, whichever it is.
I don't either. Good day. How about that?
That's good. Thank you. You had mentioned, I think, Mr. Verderami, increasing gas use is more because of, I think, coal prices and delivery cost going up. Is that correct?
Not the delivery costs, Commissioner, but the coal price for sure. You know, we dispatch economically on the least expensive fuel, and the swing we've seen has been at the dual fuel units that can burn gas or coal. So the coal burn is down about 7% from the 21-22 or 2021 to 21-22. That coal burn has been replaced by gas burn at the dual fuel units. Again, you know, the delivery is part of the equation in that it's not that it's more expensive, but it's certainly a limiting factor on being able to burn more coal than we planned on burning. But from an economic perspective, coal has outpaced gas significantly.
Well, thank you very much for that. Looking at page 5 and 6 of your direct testimony where you talk about the coal and natural gas delivered and burn cost, you know, you noted that the coal prices actually decreased, I think, from the prior year by 37%. I think that was
Not
that?
coal prices, the coal burn.
Okay.
Yes. Coal prices were roughly flat.
The coal burn was down 37%, but the coal price was down also.
Yeah. Again, that's a year-over-year number. Looking at the volume and percentage of the total megawatts we produced, that number is about 7%.
Okay, so with the coal burn being down 37%, if coal prices were down, gas prices were up, all things equal, would it have been still not more economical to increase the coal usage, or even though coal prices were down, gas prices were up, it was still more economical to use the gas?
Gas prices were up, but coal prices were up higher. So I think in your hypothetical, yes, we could have burned more coal if it was more economic. But the reality is there's very little coal to buy in 2022. This market there's no supply elasticity, if you will, no ability to buy more coal in 2022 than we had already under contract. But the reason we burned less was because of economics.
Well, with the increased demand, I guess globally, do you expect to see that change if there's a more market with?
So it's interesting that we spoke a little earlier about LNG and the limited ability for gas to move to the international market. Now, gas prices are internationally driven, but there's only so much gas that can leave the United States. Coal has a little bit more flexibility in its ability to move into overseas markets because it can be loaded on a boat and sent that way. So we do see that globally the demand for coal remains robust, particularly in Asia. They're building new coal plants there, and that combine that with the impact of Russian embargoes on coal, we'll continue to see price pressure for incremental tons of coal. I think we are at the point of competing for the marginal ton of coal with the global market here in the United States.
Are we shipping more than we're using?
I doubt we're shipping more than we're using. We're shipping more than we have.
Okay.
And the what's worrisome, and from a fuel security perspective, is that the domestic suppliers are focusing their production efforts right on those higher margins. We think coal is expensive, and it's at historic levels at $180 a ton, but to send it overseas, it's $350 a ton. So there's an economic incentive there to shift production overseas where they can.
Understand. And that, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but it generated a question when you were talking about the development of new coal plants in, I think, Asia and I guess other parts of the world. Do you know how much new generation, coal generation, is planned or being developed outside the borders of the United States?
I'm sure we could find that number, but there is new generation planned, particularly in China and in Asia, Indonesia. So I don't have the number, but it's a growing demand.
I really would be curious, or just thinking about it. You go and listen to the questions, and that, if we eliminate everything, is the same amount being developed? Is twice the amount being developed? Anyway, that's just hypothetical, but perhaps in the future that'd just be something interesting to know.
I'll bring it next time.
I think you'd also mentioned higher summer gas prices is an indication that the region has reached its limit on deliverable gas supplies. Is that what I understood?
So higher gas prices were a function of probably the hottest July and August in 50 years in the United States. Generally, in addition to all the other stressors we've talked about, limited production, storage concerns, pressure from LNG. But what I was speaking to specifically was the Zone 5 basis, the difference between Louisiana gas and gas delivered to the Carolinas. That's the phenomenon that we've not seen before. Now we've seen that in other deliverable zones as well. Florida traded at a positive basis to Henry Hub. Zone 4, Station 85 traded as a positive basis as well. Several factors, but mostly the high price of coal, high heat, and demand for gas in absent the ability to switch to coal for pricing reasons or inventory reasons in other utilities.
gas lines and transportation's been mentioned more than once, actually in I think every gas hearing that I've participated in. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you believe utilities need more interstate pipelines for gas transportation?
So Ms. Nixon's been trying to put words in my mouth all morning, so that was very less, less than, I agree, yes. I believe we need more gas transportation in the Carolinas.
If next week we could have more interstate gas pipelines, wherever they're coming from. And I can't tell you I know how that works. Well, I kind of know how that works, but I don't know it like you. Would that have an effect on natural gas or gas prices?
I believe, all things equal, just from that supply-demand equation, more supply would manifest itself as lower prices in our region. At least on a basis, a differential to gas in general, say at Henry Hub.
So relative to gas supplies themselves, like what's in the ground either being extracted or it's still there and has the ability to be extracted, is there adequate gas supplies for the region, for the country for that matter, but for our region in particular?
So speaking to the suppliers in the Appalachian region, they have much more gas than they have tapped into. And the constraint has been the infrastructure to move it out of Marcellus Shale or Appalachian general. Did I answer the question?
Yes, it does. But, I've kind of gotten the same input from, I think, the other gas folks too. And I'm really trying to wrap my head around it. Like if we know how to do this and we could do these things and maybe bring prices down, like what's holding that up? Why is that not being done?
Commissioner, you're speaking to the choir here. We feel that that's important to fuel security and to price to move those projects forward. ACP pipeline was killed not because there was no need for additional gas, it was because we didn't see a regulatory path to conclusion.
So are you saying you're not the weak link in the chain? Is that?
I don't believe we are the weak link in the chain. We are staying willing to buy the gas.
I understand. Do we have adequate infrastructure pipelines intrastate, or do you think the state needs more intrastate gas pipelines?
No, I think we have sufficient interstate pipelines for the projects we have.
And this is for Duke Energy Carolinas, Duke Energy Progress?
Yes.
And you're not speaking for
I'm not speaking for Piedmont, no.
You don't speak for Dominion either, huh?
Or especially not Dominion, but not Piedmont.
I understand. Let me see. I think
Three
that's
lawyers
it.
in the room every time I have a discussion with Piedmont. So.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Thank you.
Commissioners, any further questions for this panel? Commissioner Carol Lee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Verdemay, thank you for being here. Mr. Cameron, I rarely get to say this, and I know you only went there for grad school, but go Deeks. And I rarely get to say it from a football perspective either, but yes, for a change. But Mr. Verdemay, on to more serious things. On page 10, you talk about the fuels and related equipment, services, management, and supply agreement as being a part of cost-effective fuel supply. Will you talk more about what those benefits are to DEC and DEP, if you want to include them, and whether there's the ability to kind of grow those benefits?
Sure, absolutely. And this is, that agreement is really, I think, much as I say we're a fuel price taker, Commissioner Williams asked earlier about are we doing everything that we can to lower prices. So when it comes to taking, to being a price taker, we do the best job through execution. That's execution of contracts that provide value to customers, whether they're coal contracts, gas contracts, how we set up, how we're going to, the mix of portfolio of products that we meet the gas supply with. In coal, it's the mix of long-term, short-term contracts. In transportation, it's contracts like our tier rail contract, tier pricing rail contract. That's created over $100 million in value during its 18 months of service. The as available capacity contract, and that allows us to leverage DEP and DEC capacity for purchases. That's saved customers over $40 million. These are offsets to fuel. The last piece of that puzzle really was as there are fewer coal suppliers, we felt there was a need to consolidate how we contracted for not only coal and coal reagents, but rail service, rail car leases. So basically, that agreement allows us to negotiate and to manage all those contracts seamlessly between DEP and DEC. Whether they're probably the most concrete example is we had separate contracts with railroads between DEP and DEC, and when we had a situation where we had too much supply at one station, we would need to lay down a train set. With this agreement, we no longer need to lay that set down. We can put it into service for the other utility, leverage contracts that used to be with DEP and DEC for supply of reagents and coal, and then has also manage this portfolio of assets in the transportation side. So it's a significant agreement. It's very similar to what we did at the merger with how we manage gas, with our asset management agreement between gas. So we manage gas with one utility between DEP and DEC. So it just really kind of completes the loop there.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Commissioners? Hearing nothing further, redirect?
No redirect, Chair Belzer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony this morning. You may stand down.
Thank you.
Chair Belzer, I would just request that Mr. Cameron be excused. We'll have Mr. Vittorame stick around.
Same admonition.
Thank you.
Have the parties, are we prepared to go forward with the next panel, or do we need to take somebody out of order at this time? Where are we? Or do y'all need time to discuss that?
I'll defer to Ms. Mixon. It seems like we're good to go in order, unless you disagree.
Okay.
Yep, Chair Belzer, it looks like we should hopefully have time to get through the next panel before moving to Mr. Bin, so I don't think there's a need to take him out of order.
Thank you. Let's at least get the next panel up if we can before we break for lunch or start
Of course. Mr. Trawick will be handling this panel for the company.
Mr. Trawick, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The company would next call Ms. Sigourney Clark and Mr. Jason Martin as a panel.
We'll ask the court reporter to swear the witnesses in.
If you would both raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes.
I do. Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Clark. Would you please state your full name for the record?
Yes, Sigourney Clark.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I am a Rates and Regulatory Strategy Manager for Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas.
And did you prepare or cause to be prepared 23 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony this morning, would your answers be the same? I'm sorry, this afternoon.
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Ms. Clark's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
This is the updated testimony that you're referencing?
So the updates to hers would have been solely to the exhibits, and I
Okay.
plan to reference
Okay,
those
thank you.
corrected.
Ms. Clark's direct pre-file testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Clark, did you also prepare a cause to be prepared 13 corrected exhibits that were attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to those corrected exhibits at this time?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Ms. Clark's pre-filed corrected exhibits be entered as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Ms. Clark's updated pre-filed exhibits 1 through 13 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit 6 and entered into the record of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Clark, did you also prepare a cause to be prepared 7 pages of rebuttal testimony that were pre-filed with the commission?
Yes, I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed rebuttal testimony this afternoon, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Ms. Clark's pre-filed rebuttal testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Clark's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Clark, would you please provide a summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony at this time?
I'd be glad to. Good afternoon, Madam Chair Belzer and members of the Commission. The purpose of my direct testimony is to propose fuel rates by customer class to become effective October 1st, 2022 for DEC's South Carolina retail customers. My testimony reports DEC's actual expenditures for fuel capacity-related costs and environmental costs incurred while providing energy services to South Carolina retail customers for the review period of June 1st, 2021 through May 31st, 2022. My testimony also reports costs incurred related to DEC's Distributed Energy Resource Program, also known as DERP, for the review period. In addition, my testimony provides DEC's projected fuel costs, capacity-related costs, environmental costs, and DERP costs for the estimated period of June 1st, 2022 through September 30th, 2022, and the billing period of October 1st, 2022 through September 30th, 2023. The prospective component of the base fuel rate that DEC is recommending for the billing period is 2.3237 cents per kilowatt hour to recover the South Carolina retail share of $2.1 billion of projected system fuel expenses. The anticipated deferred base fuel balance at September 30th, 2022 is an undercollection of approximately $215.4 million. The retrospective component of the base fuel rate that DEC recommends in order to recover the undercollected balance is 1.0226 cents per kilowatt hour. The recommended composite base fuel rate is uniform for all South Carolina retail customers. Projected South Carolina retail capacity-related costs of approximately $20.8 million for the billing period are allocated to South Carolina retail customer classes based on the firm coincident peak of the prior calendar year. The anticipated capacity-related undercollection at September 30th, 2022 is approximately $7.2 million. Proposed capacity-related cost rates by customer classes are 0.1584 cents per kilowatt hour for residential customers, 0.1389 cents per kilowatt hour for general service and lighting customers, and 0.1091 cents per kilowatt hour for industrial customers. Projected South Carolina retail environmental costs of approximately $3.7 million for the billing period are allocated to South Carolina retail customer classes based on the firm coincident peak of the prior calendar year. The anticipated environmental overcollection at September 30th, 2022 is approximately $1.1 million.
proposed environmental related cost rates by customer class are 0.0134 cents per kilowatt hour for residential customers, 0.0128 cents per kilowatt hour for general service and lighting customers, and 0.0113 cents per kilowatt hour for industrial customers. Projected South Carolina retail DERP avoided costs of approximately $761,000 for the billing period are allocated to South Carolina retail customer classes based on firm coincident peak of the prior calendar year. The anticipated DERP avoided cost over collection at September 30th, 2022 is approximately $33,000. The proposed DERP avoided cost rates by customer class are 0.0040 cents per kilowatt hour for residential customers, 0.0036 cents per kilowatt hour for general service and lighting customers, and 0.0030 cents per kilowatt hour for industrial customers. The company's DERP incremental costs, which are allocated 100% to South Carolina retail customers, are projected to be approximately $11.2 million for the billing period. DEC allocates DERP incremental cost to South Carolina retail customer classes based on firm coincident peak of the prior calendar year. The anticipated over collection at September 30th, 2022 is approximately $22,000. The recommended monthly DERP per account charges are 72 cents for residential customer, $3.04 for general service customers, and $100 for industrial customers. These DERP incremental rates include gross receipts tax and regulatory fees. The industrial customer classes have reached the per account cost cap established in Act 236. The company's review period, base fuel costs, capacity-related costs, environmental costs, and DERP costs are reasonable and reflect the company's continuing efforts to maintain reliable electric service and comply with the commission-approved renewable energy initiatives in an efficient manner, thereby minimizing the total cost to South Carolina retail customers. The impact of the rates set forth in my direct testimony for an average residential customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours per month is an increase of $15.76 per month, or 13.2%. The increases in the average monthly bill for the remaining South Carolina retail customer classes are 18.3% for general service customers, 7.4% for lighting customers, and 24.4% for industrial customers. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. And would you also provide a summary of your rebuttal testimony at this time as well?
Yes. I will now provide a summary of my rebuttal testimony. The purpose of my rebuttal testimony is, one, to respond to the direct testimony of Kevin W. O'Donnell filed on behalf of South Carolina Energy Users Committee stating the commission should order the company to spread the recovery of under collection over 3 years. And two, to respond to inaccurate statements in the direct testimony of Ronald J. Benz on behalf of Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, and Upstate Forever relating to underpayments made by DEC's customers and alleged overpayments DEC's customers will make in the future. The company recognizes the impact the extraordinarily large increase in the fuel factor will have on many of its customers. While the company disagrees with Witness O'Donnell's recommendation to amortize the recovery fuel costs over 3 years, at the time I filed my rebuttal testimony, the company was working to evaluate mitigation options, engaging with interveners, but had not yet reached a resolution on the issue. As part of my rebuttal testimony, I also responded to an inaccurate statement by Witness Benz, who stated that customers would overpay their actual fuel costs in the billing period during the annual fuel proceeding. Both components, estimated and true-up periods, are reviewed for accuracy and prudency, so that over a period of 28 months, DEC customers do not over or underpay for the cost of fuel needed to supply their electricity. This concludes the summary of my rebuttal testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Good afternoon, Mr. Martin. Would you please state your full name for the record?
Yes, Jason Martin.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm a Director of Strategy, Policy, and Strategic Investment for South Carolina for Duke Energy Corporation.
And did you prepare or cause to be prepared 16 pages of corrected direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
I did.
Do you have any changes to that corrected testimony at this time?
Yes, I have one change. On page 9, line 19 of my corrected pre-filed direct testimony, the docket number should be 2022-1-E, not 2021-1-E.
Do you have any other changes, Mr. Martin?
No.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your corrected pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Martin's corrected pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Martin's corrected pre-filed direct testimony will be read into the records as if given orally.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Martin, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared one corrected exhibit that was attached to your corrected pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes.
Do you have any changes to make to that exhibit at this time?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, I would ask that Mr. Martin's corrected pre-filed exhibit be entered as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Martin's corrected pre-filed direct exhibit 1 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 7 and admitted into the record of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Martin, would you please provide a summary of your testimony at this time?
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. The purpose of my testimony is to provide support for the Distributed Energy Resource Program, or DERP, costs that are incorporated into the proposed fuel factor sponsored by witness Sigourney Clark. I will describe the nature of the cost as well as the changes made in the DERP portfolio since the 2021 fuel proceeding, and I will address these changes in the value of DER methodology. DEC incurred DERP costs totaling $13,110,945 in the review period, anticipates incurring $5,064,300 during the estimated period, and projects to incur $14,405,228 in the billing period. These costs represent the avoided and incremental costs associated with the company's approved DERP filings, including 1, purchase power agreements executed to fulfill the company's utility scale goals under Act 236, and 2, the Distributed Energy Resource Net Energy Metering Incentive, 3, the solar rebate program, 4, carrying cost on deferred solar rebate amounts, 5, shared solar program, 6, NEM avoided capacity cost, 7, NEM meter cost, and 8, general and administrative expenses, including incremental labor costs as a direct result of DERP, IT, and billing enhancements, and other administrative costs associated with delivering these new programs to customers. The DER NEM incentive is a credit available to eligible net energy metering customer generators who applied before June 1st, 2021, that enables them to receive full retail rate compensation for each kilowatt hour generated by their solar facility. Although the NEM incentive program will be phased out pursuant to Act 62, it is necessary to consider the cost of the NEM incentive as part of this proceeding during the pendency of the DERP cost recovery. As of July 2021, DEC has met the renewable generation goals under Act 236. Additionally, by applying the avoided cost methodology and the rates approved by the Commission in Orders 2019-881A and 2020-315A, as well as updated input assumptions, DEC has updated the 2022 value of NEM distributed energy resources to $0.3078 per kilowatt hour for schedules RES and RTOUD, $0.3078 per kilowatt hour for schedules SGS, and $0.03121 per kilowatt hour for all other schedules. This concludes my testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Madam Chair, Ms. Clark and Mr. Martin are now available for questions from council and the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Trawick. Is there cross for this panel?
ORS has brief cross.
Okay. I don't want to interrupt anybody's cross, so I'm trying to figure out to break now or I don't want to rush you, but I'm just trying to get a feel here.
Yeah, we also have some fairly brief cross. I'd say maybe 15 to 20 minutes.
Well, why don't
at
we
most.
break? Is that okay? Is that going to throw you off stride? Let's break until, what is it? That's 12:40. Let's break until 1:55. That'll give us about an hour and 15 minutes for lunch. Thank you. Witnesses, I would like to caution that you are under oath and ask you not to discuss your testimony with anyone. Thank you. We'll be back at 1:55. Am I reading the clock right? Okay. I may need a digital.